Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I am reviewing Monster Hunter World by Steamforged Games. This is a game that's going up on Kickstarter on April 20th. I will have a link down below to, well, the pre-launch page as well as, the Kickstarter when it goes up. I also already have a 2-hour-long gameplay on Tabletopia where I dived in and learned it together with the Steamforged team for the first time, jumping in, getting that experience. And since then, I've had the opportunity to play it a bunch more, both solo and with someone else. And, well, this is the review part. Now, obviously, this is a prototype. Everything you see before you, from components to the rules, changes, all that is very much prototype form. I know that there are already component changes, and obviously you're seeing a small subset. And when I say small subset, I mean a small subset. You are seeing a subset of the very first core entry box that they are having on Kickstarter. There's going to be multiple pledge levels in terms of, the minimal entry point, and then more, and then more, and then more, and then more. This is, after all, Kickstarter, and you're seeing the smallest portion of that entry box on the table here. And I'll be going through it. I'll be going through a bit of a how to play, a bit of an overview. I'm not going to go full rules in depth. We effectively learned that on Tabletopia, so if you want to see the full deep dive, you can check that out. Additionally, I believe they have a gameplay on their own channel, on Steamforged Games channel as well, if you want to check that out. And make sure to stay tuned for, I don't know everyone who has this, but I believe Quackalope has a copy, as well as King of Average, so make sure to check out their content as well once that goes up, or depending on when this video goes up, perhaps it's already up, in which case I'll throw a link down below, so fun facts and all that. And so, let's see how quickly I can do this. I want to see how quickly I can get through this. The overview of Monster Hunter World is going to be as follows. Monster Hunter World is going to be a monster hunting game, in which you have multiple hunters. You can play between 2 to 4 hunters, I believe, and you're going to be trying to effectively hunt down monsters across the course of a campaign. The game does support single-shot adventures, although that is going to be secondary to the main primary directive of basically having a campaign experience. A campaign experience that is going to last 25 days. Each of those days is going to be used to hunt down a monster. For some of those days, you can kind of get a freebie if you fail. It's for those core monsters, is to ensure that you can actually go through it. Other monsters, you do what you do and you either get it or you don't. So 25 days. Now, 5 of those days can be used for, I should rephrase that, some of those days can be used for other types of quests or things you can do along the way, although the game recommends not using more than 5 of those days for those other types of stuff along the way. So effectively, you're going to play a campaign that is going to have at least 20 monster experiences. Sometimes the exact same monsters at higher increased levels as you go through them, sometimes just purely introductories, because every single monster is going to have different types of quests. They're going to have the assigned quests, experiences that you are meant to have. Your campaign is going to force you through, and then you can go back and revisit those monsters at higher levels as they upgrade, as they get better and harder and tougher to fight, and you're going to go through that again across at least 20 monster encounters if you follow the game's recommendation. That is going to be the overall structure of the actual campaign. In between each set of missions or whatnot, every single monster encounter is going to have you going through this quest book in order to go through basically a choose your own adventure as you try to see what is it you're going to do. Are you going to see the monster by the stream, hunt it down? Do you search for tracks around the river bend? What's around the river bend? All of that. Do you go through those different choose your own adventures, eventually encountering said monster at the end? Once you encounter the monster, you will jump into this book. You're going to remove those quest books, anything you got along the way, whether potions, whether you got potions, lost health, lost time. You're going to go into this experience and you'll have your hunters and the monster. So let's say I'm playing a 2-player game. At this point, we'll go ahead and remove the Anjanath from play. We're facing off against the Great Jagras. Great Jagras is going to be over there. We're going to have 2 characters. Let's go ahead and say we have the bow archer starting off over here, as well as the sword and shield, and we'll move those other people off to the side. So now, again, this is just one of your multiple scenarios. You jump into this mission like so. From there, the monster is going to drive forward the fight. The monster is going to activate their card. Now, they may or may not have a slight addition to their deck, depending on exactly how that scenario played out, how the Choose Your Own Adventure guide played out. They're going to go ahead and play their first card. We have Forward Swing. You're going to read that card from left to right. The card is going to define what happens in this game. That card is going to define the target, how much the monster moves, whether it moves before or after combat, what type of attack it does, how much the range of the attack, what's the arc of the attack, who it damages, how much you need to spend to dodge, and then the important part, well, all of it's the important part. The important part is how many hunters activate and then how many cards they can play on their turn. So this Forward Swing, for instance, is going to allow 1 hunter to activate and 2 cards to be played. This belly roll left is going to allow 2 hunters to activate, playing 2 cards each. So the monster drives the scenario forward. Just going through a quick read of the card, this indicates that the monster attacks the closest hero. That would be the furthest hero over there. This indicates whether it moves and to what direction, always oriented based on the monster's orientation. So in this case, the monster is going to move to the right like so, or the left, depending on which angle you're doing. Then from there, we're going to have the damage attack. That's going to be a 7 damage attack at 1 range. The hunters can play 3 cards, or 3 agility more specifically, to dodge it. This attack is going to deal stun, and it's going to attack all those 3 arcs over there. The cards can be a little bit messy, but you can very quickly pick it up once you go through, well, 4 or 5 cards. You'll have a quick understanding of how they operate. So a lot of information being stored in there, but ultimately not that hard to go through. When the monster's done taking its turn and dealing all the associated damage, whether the hunters decided to play cards down to their card row to evade, whether they weren't even in the line of activation or whatnot, the hunters can go ahead and take their turn. They're going to have their own deck of cards. So I have here 5 cards or whatnot in my hand, and we're going to go ahead and say a hunter's turn is going to be as follows. I'm going to go ahead and look at my cards, choose what to play. I automatically get a free movement. So we're going to go ahead and take advantage of that free movement with this archer over here, moving 1. You can move diagonally as so. There's a little bit of terrain and whatnot, but I'm going to go ahead and move my free movement. I can play additional cards to my card row face down. This is my stamina row. I can play additional cards face down to my stamina row to move more. Generally, you want to be very mindful of doing so because you're going to clog up your stamina over here. Your stamina is going to drive the game. You want to be very on top of that to ensure you don't run out of it. I'm going to go ahead and move my 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose to take my attacks. In this case, I'm playing as the archer who has a bunch of ranged attacks. So I'm going to go ahead and do charged shot. Charged shot's going to allow me to draw 2 damage cards. If my hunter was within range 1, it could draw an additional damage card, but I'm not, so it's going to be 2 damage cards. We're going to go ahead and look at my damage card deck, and I'm going to draw 2 cards at the top. We have 1 damage, and we have 1 damage, 2 damage that will deal to the Great Jaguar's 50 health. I'm going to go ahead and play another card. Don't forget, I can play 2 cards based on that particular card over there. And I'm going to go ahead and do charge shot again. Do these charge shots. I'm just going to do a regular shot. I'm going to save the charge shot. Even though it has a range of 3, if I can get closer, it can do a lot more damage. So I'm going to go ahead and do a regular shot from there, drawing another damage card, doing another 1 damage. Keep in mind, intro decks will come back to that. So not really powered up in terms of these damage decks. From there, I've played my 2 cards. I can go ahead and draw a times passes cards. Those are going to give you a default set of instructions you follow to end your turn, as well as potentially some small things to mix it up, such as clearing an extra card of your stamina row or whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and flip my hunter token face down to indicate I've taken my turn. It's now the next hunter's turn to go. I'm going to go ahead and discard the rightmost attack card from my stamina row, clearing it up so I can take further actions. Then I can choose to discard any number of remaining cards. Perhaps I only feel I need 1 of these power coatings, and then I draw up to 5. That is going to be the hunter's turn. You're going to rinse and repeat until either you are all dead or the monster is dead. And by you are all dead, I should be more specific. Every time you die, it's considered to be a feint. You are entitled to 3 feints, at which point you lose the game. That's not bad for time. I think I did that pretty quickly. You can slow down, play that on 0.5 speed, and maybe you'll understand how to play the game. So, that's Monster Hunter World in very short. So, quick overview. 25-day campaign, fighting monsters along the way. Monster drives the action forward. Lots of things we didn't really touch upon. What happens when the monster moves, when it charges into you? When the monster moves, it moves into your space, and you can choose how to move as long as you're within its forward arc. It's going to pivot, move towards you again and again until it consumes its full movement. So you have this opportunity to kind of dodge out of the way, driving the monster's movement forward. There's going to be terrain in the game. It's not going to have a huge impact on the gameplay, but the terrain can do things such as hiding you in case there's a tie in terms of who's being attacked, because this 8 and 7 define who the greatest threat is. Being in a bush lowers your threat by 4. You're going to have your weapon deck, which I already talked about briefly. That's going to be the deck you draw your damage cards from. Once you run out of your damage cards, you're going to need to take a resting turn in order to get those damage cards back, sharpening your weapon, as it were. If you ever walk through water, you're going to lose another damage card, which again can be impactful if you are running out of cards. The game is going to have an upgrade system, which we talked about already. When you eventually defeat the Great Jaguarus, you're going to go ahead and take a look at its back, and you're going to get a bunch of rewards. Those rewards will vary depending on what happened throughout the game. You're going to be able to roll dice and get general rewards. Additionally, if you've unlocked certain breakpoints in the monster, that's going to be these breakpoints over here, then you get earned rewards for certain. So the monster's going to have a bunch of different things going on the board. We'll go through a quick overview of what the monster board looks like. The monster board has 50 health. This is a level 1 creature over here. That's its symbol. This is going to be its resistances to certain effects. This is going to be where we store the tokens for when it has a resistance. This is going to be its default effect. In this case, the Great Jagras is gluttonous, or gluttonous, I think is the word. And we're going to, each time the monster deals 1 or more damage, it's going to gain 1 health back. So constantly trying to get some health back. These are going to be its 3 breakpoints, which indicates whether it has armor, from which directions it has armor, and how many break tokens it needs to achieve that breakpoint, which may have an in-game effect if there's text, or alternatively just defines what resources you're guaranteed going to get, and those resources are going to be very helpful when it comes time to actually upgrade your weapons. It's going to be the Ancient Forest Sword and Shield reference, in which you have different weapons you can get, different weapons and armor you can upgrade, and you'll need specific tokens. This one needs 1 Monster Bone Small to be able to get the Bone Kakari. We're going to need the Monster Bone Small over here. You're unlocking certain effects with different creatures, giving you a flow chart of how you can accomplish or get those different gear. That is effectively Monster Hunter World. I hope that made mostly sense from there. I hope we covered the general idea. We covered health. We covered, what else am I missing here? We covered elemental damages. Elemental damage is going to be the idea that you can do elemental damage in the game, and you'll draw cards from the elemental deck, potentially doing chunks more damage once you achieve certain breakpoints in the elemental damage. We're going to have these over here, the Calicos, or Palicos, I think they're called, the Palicos. I haven't actually played Monster Hunter World, the video game, so Palicos over here, which are something you can take whenever you're playing with 2 hunters or whatnot. You would draw a Palico each. It's a compensating factor to having less overall health on the battlefield. You'll get those one-time abilities that you can utilize. And then as well over here, this is going to be the upgrade cards that have been provided with in the prototype, just giving you tons of upgraded weapons, because when you get a weapon upgrade, there's going to be armor upgrades and weapon upgrades. Weapon upgrades are going to define what damage goes into your damage deck. It's going to up the amount of damage you can do. In this case, we have 3 level 1 cards, 4 level 2 cards, and 5 level 3 damage cards, which is drastically different than your starting weapon, which has mostly 1s and then a handful of 2s. It's also going to define different cards you take out and add to your deck, which can, well, make you more powerful. We're going to have cards like that. We're also going to have armor. So over here we have some of the high level armors you can unlock, which will give you elemental resistances, abilities, and armor. You will start the game with some default armor that will give you a little bit of resistance to the attacks, but really not much. Don't rely on that to save you, because rest assured, it will not. That is going to be Monster Hunter World. As far as what I like about this game, we'll go through this. Is going to be, and I also mentioned at this point, there will definitely be a play this, not that, between Monster Hunter World and Primal on the shelf behind me. Fortunately, I have my hands on that still, so I can do a proper play this, not that, with actual everything on the table. But this is going to be more focused on Monster Hunter World. The play this, not that will come eventually at some point, maybe during the campaign. I don't know exactly when, but for right now, we're doing this over here. Over here, the Monster Hunter World, to begin with, the miniatures in general are going to be off. I mean, look at these miniatures. They're solid. These are prototypes, obviously, so the resin might be a little more crisp, a little more detailed. But Steamforged Games has always done incredibly well with their miniatures, or mostly done incredibly well with the miniatures. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they bring to the table with the full deluxe fight set, as well as the gigantic miniature you get if you go all in and get everything. There's one ridiculously large miniature. Haven't seen it. Very intrigued to see it, because I do need a replacement for my Joan of Arc dragon that left the collection a while ago. As far as the game itself, I mean, hopefully I covered this with my overview, however fast I may have gone, but while there's a lot you might have to know as the main person running this game, and a lot is relative, it's not that much, but there's definitely a degree that you have to know in terms of managing the sequencing, managing the flow, how different things interact, but the actual game is fairly easy to teach. The actual gameplay is fairly streamlined, all things considered, and I would say the game itself, forgetting for a second the easy to teach aspect, the game itself is not fiddly in the slightest. There's not a lot going on here that gets in the way of quick, simple fun. The game is very streamlined. You pull out your cards, you play your cards to your stamina row, you draw an end turn card, you remove a card from the stamina row, goes back to the monster turn, the monster does its thing, defines how many hunters go, rinse, repeat until you get to the end. It is incredibly streamlined in terms of what it's doing with not a lot of fiddliness thrown in. And that's with great intent in terms of the game design. So we'll get back to that in the final thoughts aspect, but there's a lot of intent in terms of from Steamforged Games and trying to make this as streamlined as an experience as possible. Not trying to replicate the video game inherently, but rather trying to replicate the feel of it that they want to bring to the table in a board game. The monster movement is going to be pretty fun over here, because the monster movement charging across the board, and by the way, the monsters over here, the 2 monsters I have, feel drastically different in the way they actually play. The Great Jagras over here, not the Great Jagras, the Anjanath is going to charge across the board, hunting down the monsters, being able to target people, and constantly moving every time it's damaged. This is not a monster that stays still, this is a monster that is constantly on the move, charging around the landscape. The Great Jagras, on the other hand, operates in a much smaller sphere. It's rolling around, dealing large bursts of damage, lots of stunning, a lot more control controllable, a lot more predictable, but also regaining health at the same time. So these two already feel pretty different. Keep in mind, these are the only two I have, so I'm only commenting on these two in terms of that. But the movement, the Great Jaguars charging across the board, constantly chasing you down, and being able to manage that versus the Anjanath versus the Great Jaguars slowly moving around and being a little bit more manageable. The monster movement gives you the opportunity to react, to choose where to go. You're gonna have to make decisions along the way. Do I want to sit there and try to avoid that damage? What is the right time to take 6 damage? Maybe I let my character drop down to 1 health, because at that point, taking 7 damage in a single shot is no different than taking 1 damage or 3 damage, because it's all the same at that point. As well as the fact that you want to kind of time your death around having a full stamina row, because your stamina row will fill up as the game progresses. You're going to be constantly trying to manage the fact that, yes, you get to play 2 or 3 cards on your turn, but on a typical turn, you only clear 1 card at a time unless you get a special bonus from this deck. So how do you manage that balance? Yes, you'll have faint cards in your deck. Cards that let you take out cards from your stamina row. Perhaps you occasionally take a resting turn that will let you take another card out from your stamina row. So there are ways to balance it. But one of the ways to balance it is choosing when to time your death so you can clear your card row. And it's not death, you're fainting or whatnot. So you can clear your card row, reset, come back to the battle prepared, timing all those aspects. Those little palicos will give you a fun balancing factor for playing it with 2 versus 3 versus 4 or whatnot. It gives you a nice compensating factor to the fact that you have less health, less presence, less manipulation on the battlefield. Surprisingly, very surprisingly for myself, I enjoyed the demo book, or not demo book, the quest book, because the quest book gives you a choose your own adventure aspect to this story where you can go through choosing different aspects of, I want to move here, I want to track the monster there, I want to jump through the cave and whatnot. Now things will happen along the way, good and bad. You will unlock extra bonuses that will help you level up your character. You know, you'll unlock some bone fragments, you'll find some things, you'll also lose some health, you'll also lose some time. There's a balancing fact to that choose your own adventure book. Now, less surprisingly, I enjoy the hero and monster progression. I've always liked abilities in every one of the games I play, and having the monsters here level up, which I haven't yet been able to see, does sound like it adds a degree of tenseness, of challenge to the game. Those introductory monsters, those assigned quests, are going to be easier monsters to handle, all things considered. But as they level up, they will become more and more of a challenge, something that you have to really try to balance and learn their behaviors, which you will learn as the game progresses. So it's going to add that additional challenge to the table. Now, seeing the heroes progress, or I've already been able to see because we do have some cards unlocked already, but having those heroes level up to add to their gear, to add to their weapon set, while not as diverse in terms of the degree of abilities or changes I would like, it does feel fun to power up your hero, to power up their battle deck, to power up their weapon, their armor, and give them more options in terms of how they handle the actual gameplay. And then I think it's worth doubling down on, the game is incredibly streamlined. The game gives you, I mean, streamlined is going to be relative, of course, but compared to games of this ilk, compared to games that I've played of this nature, this is possibly, or almost not possibly, this is certainly the most streamlined monster-style game I've played in terms of the simplicity it gives you past the rulebook, which is not overwhelming. I mean, the rulebook does have a lot, don't get me wrong. This is everything you have going on over here, but it actually reads pretty quickly, and there's not really all that much you have to know when it comes time to dive in. This is a game that I was able to get when I played this with Quacklip. I was able to get him up and running in literally like 5-6 minutes. We were able to just jump straight into the game, start playing, and occasionally had to teach a rule here or there, but there was no aspect of, well, trying to manage, are we doing this right? Are we messing up that? Are we missing this aspect? It's very quick and streamlined in what it does. As far as the things I don't like, it's really going to come down to 2 things. And the first of which I've already seen people comment on, and it's going to be a big balance between Monster Hunter World players or not. The artwork in this game, I mean, I don't mind the board. The board is fine for me. The miniatures are amazing. The artwork does not pull me in the slightest. Now, to be fair, they are staying true to the video game, so that's great for them. But for myself, I mean, the dichotomy between having this cave drawing style artwork and then the other characters, it just feels out of place. Now, it's from the video game, to be very clear. This is my own personal preference. But my own personal preference has me completely uninterested in the cave drawing stuff, but even that I would say I can get past. I'm just really not a fan of digital stills in board games. I mean, you can see these cards over here. They're taking digital assets from the board game and adding from the video game and adding them to the board game such that we don't have amazingly refined art or something like that. We just have digital stills, which as a personal preference, I am not into at all. So the art style of this game, unfortunately, does not pull me in the way I'd like. And secondly, and likely more importantly, because I can get past bad art today, tomorrow, Castles of Burgundy, after all, is one of my favorite games. First or second edition, doesn't really matter. They both look terrible, but they are amazing experiences. I'll get past the artwork. The second issue for me is likely going to come down to the depth of the game, to the degree of interesting aspects it provides. So let's go through a few of these, and keep in mind, this is a balance between the streamlined nature of what the game is able to do versus the messiness and the options that come along the way. So we have these time passes cards. It's going to be a giant deck of cards that slowly indicate the passage of time, and most of them are going to be exactly the same. We'll have a few of them that have a handful of abilities. I almost want to see more chaos, more messiness on this deck. If you're going to give me a deck full of things that can change, then I want more change and not the occasional card changing. The terrain I just feel is completely underwhelming. The forest over here barely has an impact on gameplay. Maybe once the entire game being in one of these spots will actually matter, at least based on the plays I've had so far. Now, I believe the monsters, as the game progresses, as you go through the campaign, I believe some of the monsters will interact with terrain in different ways, so keep in mind this is based purely on my experience of the 2 scenarios I've been provided with, but I would say the terrain so far I find underwhelming. The breakpoints on the monster is going to be something that, again, I kind of want to see more things happen. We have some fun things, like when we break the tail of the Great Jagras, sure, it loses 5 damage. When we break its head, there's a little more of a tactical aspect there because suddenly the elemental damage it's doing is no longer elemental and turns into physical. That's great, especially if you're trying to, well, counter it with your armor or anything like that. But I kind of want to see more from the monsters. I want to see more development as the monster gets hit, as it fights back. I want to see an escalation in the game and not just 2 breakpoints with minor abilities. I want to see more text abilities on the cards. I want to see more interplay between the cards, that this card plays off that. To be clear, there is interplay, there is positioning. There are cards that, if this is the first one in your row, you'll be able to do a bunch of extra things. If this is the last card in your row, there certainly is interplay and text on the cards, but not as much as I would like. The elemental damage is just basically draw a card from a deck and deal that amount of extra damage. It doesn't feel like I'm shooting someone with a lightning bolt or with fire. It just feels like I'm doing extra damage. The resistances are a factor, sure, but the actual text or abilities are all that. And it all falls under one general umbrella of I kind of want to see more things happening in this game. That streamlinedness, that ability to be able to jump into this rapidly and easily is great, and I cannot emphasize how much of a value that is. But at the same time, it comes at the cost of some of the degrees of interplay I'd love to see from this game. As far as what I can see others not liking, I would say this is very much geared more towards campaign game players than single-shot adventure. That's going to be from 2 aspects, and this isn't the problem for me because, honestly, this game is so streamlined in terms of what it's being able to do that for me, jumping into a campaign, it actually seems very easy to be able to jump in, to remember what you were up to have your gear, and then just go straight into it. I would almost certainly only play this as a campaign anyway, so it's not a factor for me. But if you're someone who's looking at this in terms of the one-shot, the one-shots have been fun. Keep in mind, I've only played this as one-shot adventures. The inherent nature of the scenarios I have right now is it's all one-shot. But the one-shot also has a degree of compromise in the sense in twofold. First of all, going through that actual quest book over here, whenever you encounter something that says you pause to gather some monster bones or do something else, that element of choice is kind of removed because there is no long-term impact of the bones you are or are not gathering if you go through that quest book. Now, I also believe, strictly speaking, one-shots do not have the quest book, so balance that as you will. And additionally, the breakpoints of the monster. Something like this breakpoint over here where there is no text ability and therefore the only impact of that breakpoint is going to be the gear it rewards you at the end of the mission. Well, it takes away that strategic choice in a one-shot mode. So very much this game is catered towards campaign above one-shot, and a few compromises in the one-shot are made along the way. Not significantly so, but still worth being aware of. And then lastly, and this is more of a one more thing in terms of the monster behavior cards. Sorry, over there, the monster behavior cards. While I personally don't mind these at all, they're very easy to read. Once you go through 2 or 3 of them, they're very easy to pick up. I can see people being frustrated by the degree of just stuff going on this card. It is absolutely a mess the first time you look at it. Once you know what to do, the monster is going to attack the furthest away monster, it's going to move forward 3, and then it's going to do a 5 damage attack. You have to play 2 agility to avoid it, 1 range in its forward arc, then 1 hunter goes ahead and takes their action, playing 2 cards. It is incredibly easy to read once you pick it up, but I can see people taking a look at that and saying, well, that looks like a mess. As far as my final thoughts on Monster Hunter World, it really is kind of both. To begin with, I absolutely want this game. If I were rating this game right now, it would be a 4 to 5. It is a lot of fun to jump into it. It's a lot of fun to go through those missions, to jump into, to hunt down the monsters, to chase them down, to be chased down in turn, to avoid their charging attacks, to play your cards, to manage your stamina row. And your stamina row, by the way, is something that I was far more frustrated with initially, but the more I've played the game, the more I've learned to trigger my pacing. My very first interaction on my very first game playing it online was choosing to avoid an attack by playing 3 cards down to my stamina row. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, but practically speaking, in my first play, I was constantly fighting an uphill battle to clear my stamina row, knowing when to actually take that damage from attack as opposed to when it's not a problem, when it is a problem, and balancing all that. There was a lot of strategic choice in that aspect of the gameplay. Slowly hurting a monster, triggering their health down from the 50 or whatever it is they're at, to slowly taking them down as they fight you, as you die, as you manage to get back up again, and all of that. There really is a lot of choice and fun in a game that is incredibly streamlined. All of that is going to be balanced by the fact that I also want a little bit more from this game. Now keep in mind, I don't know what the Kickstarter offers. I don't know what the additional options are in terms of the expansion, in terms of the variability. I don't know all of that comes to the table. I'm only commenting on the 2 scenarios I currently have. As a final note, I'll touch upon the monster variability. One of the concerns I do have, and I am curious to see how this plays out, but specifically because there is less of those abilities left, right, and center, there's not like monster behaviors, there's not a lot of variability and all these things happening here. I do have that slight concern that how will the variability, work across 12 different monsters? Will it actually feel different, as these two very much do? Will they be able to keep that different feel? Something I'm just being mindful of while not knowing. Overall, Monster Hunter World is a great game. I can see a lot of people liking this. I think this does an incredible job in terms of the fan service to the video game. To anyone who likes the video game to begin with, offhand, I can recommend it. I know it uses the Dark Souls system for the boss fights. It uses that aspect. And Dark Souls, I believe the boss fights were the best part of it from what I've heard. I've never played Dark Souls, but it's something worth being mindful of. Overall, Monster Hunter World is currently on Kickstarter. I do recommend checking it out. It is a lot of fun, a little bit on the lighter side in case that's not something you're looking for, but past that, it is a solid degree of monster hunting goodness. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.